All right, what's up? This is Nick and Gabriel here to talk about our
Hello.
learning map assignments. So I focused on first grade, and we're obviously doing a lot about reading comprehension, phonemic awareness, phonemes, all the different types of words and different things that make up reading. So I focused on syllables, and the way I describe syllables is syllables are the sounds that make up a word. And in order to learn the bigger things, words, sentences, paragraphs, stories, you have to learn syllables. That's why I always say dinner before dessert. Learn the little itty bitty steps before you take the bigger steps. So in my video, I talked about how games I would like to use to, not games, an activity I like to use to describe syllables. So if I were to say pencil, I would clap at every single syllable. Pencil. Radio, radio. Every clap equals one syllable because it's a sound. Each clap is a sound. And then I gave all the students a sheet in which there is about 8 to 10 pictures, and each picture has 4 words next to it. And these are all one syllable words, such as swim, crack, so on and so forth. And what I want the students to do is to pick out the word from the list that best matches the picture right next to it. This will help me determine which of the students have a basic understanding and are more prepared to move on to more advanced material, and which students may need more time. And I think and I'm big on using visuals. I'm a visual learner. I'm also a visual teacher. And I recognize that students learn differently, and having pictures is gonna, like we talked about in the collaborate sessions, how engaging different optimal parts of the brain. I really like how visuals can do that. So that was one of my big focuses with coming about syllables and using that. And so I think that it can be tedious, but it doesn't have to be. I think we need to make learning fun. And so that's why I want to use games, I want to use individual work, I want to use small group work. And at the end of each lesson that I do, whether it's syllables or whatever the lesson is, I want to make sure that we review it as a class. That way the students are getting another opportunity to speak about it, to hear about it, to learn about it from the teacher, myself, and from other students. And that was my philosophy with why I did what I did.
Well, it's a philosophy that I can get behind. I really like that analogy that you used, or not analogy, I guess that phrasing that you used, dinner before dessert. You got to have a good foundation with any subject that you're teaching before you can go ahead and add on anything to it. Because without a good foundation or good fundamentals, I feel like students can get excited about saying, "Oh, well, I learned this," and not actually have a proper understanding of it, just to say they learned it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like, yeah, I got an achievement, cool. But then when it comes time for them to actually use it, they'll find themselves stumbling over things, such as pronunciations, grammar, spelling, all those different things that reading comprehension helps with. But I really did enjoy what you worked with. I guess so since you're working with such a young group, using visuals, how do you go off from a verbal standpoint with explaining things to them? Because I know when I've worked with younger students, the visuals help. It keeps them grounded and it gives them something to focus in on. But when you're giving instructions, do you like to repeat phrases a lot or repeat directions? Or is it one of those things where you kind of say it once, and then if a student has a concern or something like that, you kind of go around and gauge the room and see if you need to add any more depth to what you're explaining?
I think I'm a big believer in short, sweet, to the point. I don't want to overload the students with too much information, because that's just information overload. Their brains can get all kind of out of whack. And so, but you also don't want to give too little information to where they don't know what they're doing. So that's obviously a fine line. But I believe in short, sweet, to the point. So I do think you have to be repetitive, but I don't want to be overly repetitive. So the things that in a lesson, the more important portions of that lesson, I will probably repeat multiple times from the start. And that'll give students extra time to hear and process that. I once heard a study not too long ago that today's student, on average, doesn't process information unless they're told it at least 3 times. So that doesn't mean you need to say everything 3 times, because
Of course.
we don't have the time for that. But I think for the things that, especially with the first grade classroom, that I think that it's important to say what's important and repeat those important steps. And so that's my philosophy. And I want them to ask questions. If I spoke too little and they didn't ask questions, or spoke too much and they didn't ask, it's all for naught. So I definitely want the students to ask questions, because it shows that they're engaged, and it shows that maybe asking questions isn't always a sign of they weren't listening. Maybe they just didn't hear. Maybe they just didn't understand the way I said it. Maybe someone next to them was distracting them. I think that it shows a level of curiosity. Maybe it shows that they're confused, which I think there's nothing wrong with being confused. I think all of us go through, parts of the day where we're confused about something. So imagine what a first grader feels like when they're trying to learn syllables, or whatever they're trying to learn. So
Exactly.
I think that it's important to welcome and encourage the curiosity and the confusion, and to do your best to work with that, and to just teach and repeat and emphasize all the most important pieces of whatever it is that you're teaching.
It's funny you said that that 3 count, about how students need to typically hear things about 3 times. I've come up with my own rule without even having heard of that study that you're referencing, but it's called the rule of 3, and I use that for different things. The rule of 3 is, if something's important for me to explain, I'll repeat it 3 times, and on the 3rd time I'll say, okay, class, what did I just say? And then I'll have the class repeat it back to me. So this way it's kind of my own verbal understanding that they understood what I just said.
Yeah.
And then the other rule of 3 that I have is, anytime I'm going to go ahead and transition into something, I'll hold up my hand in the air and I'll go, all right, class, 3, 2, 1. And by the time I get down to 0, everybody in the class has to go ahead and hold up that 0 for me, because that lets me know, okay, everybody is focused on me. We know we're transitioning, and we're able to go ahead and move on into the next portion. So I liked how that segued in there for the two of us. And again, I agree. Sometimes less is more with instructions. Sometimes
absolutely
the easier you make something to understand, the easier it is for the student to do it. And if there's clarification needed because it's so simple in what you said, it's like, okay, pick which part, and I can help you understand it better. And then you can go ahead and work on that one part with the student, or the several parts, or however many they need. As we get into older grades, I feel like that applies more with the whole less is more thing. But at the same time, you have the ability when they're older and can understand more and can take more into their heads all at once, where you can go ahead and open up that dialogue for them later.
Absolutely. I agree completely. And I liked what you said earlier about how a lot of students it's not uncommon for them to just do the work for completion, do the work for the achievement to get the grade, but then they just completely went in one ear out the other of what they just learned. And so that's where I think I talked about this in one of my discussion boards, about how that's one of my gripes with the grade-based system. Obviously, we need grades, and there's many important aspects of grades, but there's also an unintended consequence of when students just focus on reading and rereading and memorizing, and then they do the assignment, they take the test, whatever it is, and then they're done with it. If you asked me to take some of the SAT and take the questions that I had to take, when I was in high school, I would get a really bad grade on it. And so, I just think that there has to be a more effective way for us to gather and understand what the students have learned and what they need to learn, versus just simply, oh, you get an A, B, C, D, E, F, whatever. Let's got to find a way. So I don't have the solution for it, but I know that's I'm sure there's other people who feel the same.
One of my I'm so glad you just brought this up right now too. So the way I look at it is, grades are important, but but and you said it earlier too, that learning should be fun. We should make learning an experience for the students and something that they can remember, other than just saying like, oh, I know how to say my ABCs. Why do you know how to say your ABCs? You remember that experience you had with it, singing it in the class, and being
Uh-huh.
with your friends and stuff like that. I've always looked at learning, and it may not be the most popular thing, kind of through the lens of two of my favorite TV shows, and those two shows are Boy Meets World, which had an awesome teacher in Mr. Feeney,
Of course.
and The Wonder Years, which as a show itself taught us about all these different things along the way, using school as a lens to learn social issues as well as actual things that you do in class. I've always looked at education through that lens of trying, like, what would Mr. Feeney do? Because whenever they were in school, every time he got a lesson for them, he always tried to find a way to help them relate to it.
Yep.
And I've always tried to kind of use that to kind of center myself in how do I want to make this work for the kids. I figure every day they come into class, it's either a 45-minute episode for them, or it's if you're teaching English like I am, it's an hour and 40 minutes of an episode that they're getting daily. And so you want to make sure that there's something important to go over from the beginning, the middle, and the end that they can take away from it. But then again,
Yeah.
that's just me because I grew up in a musically inclined family, so there's that element of performance that's in there, stuff like that. So I enjoy kind of incorporating that into my work, and trying to make things exciting with students as well.
I agree. I like that, and I think kind of talking about what you said about how can they apply it, and I think about like everyday life. At the end of the day, they're going to spend way more time outside of a classroom, outside of school, in their lives than they are inside a classroom in a school. Because you only go to school from, you have to go from kindergarten through high school. That's required. Obviously, many students go on to college. Even if you go from K through college, even if you get a master's or so on after that, the reality is majority of your life is not going to be in the classroom. You're not going to be at school. So you have to take what small amount you have in terms of time, learn that and use that outside the classroom. And that's one of the challenges we face in our special education program, is that we're only with the students Monday through Friday, and we're only with them so much of the day. And so many of our students come from some less than ideal situations, to put it kindly. And so it can be hard when, when the bell rings at 3 o'clock, all of a sudden they go home. We wonder, is everything we just did that entire day about to be undone? When Friday the bell rings and they go home for the weekend, is the whole week just a wash? We do see some progress over time, so it's obviously not a wash, but just in terms of the overall big picture, that's where I just think it's so important to maximize the time and to, I wish there's many things that are great in what we learn in school, but there's also some things that we probably don't very well use a lot of our lives. And so I think that it's so critical that we focus on what is going to be used every day forever.
I couldn't agree more with you on that. From where my students, the demographic students that I work with, we're situated very close to the southern border, and so there's a whole kind of I guess for lack of a better term, there's a completely different feeling that you would get when you come in, or a different culture that you get in our school district than you would at say in San Diego or in Riverside County, LA County. It's its whole breed on and of itself. And when they do go home, there is a lot of times where a lot of what we went over in the day just completely gets undone, because the home culture is different than the culture that we're trying to perpetuate inside the classroom and in school. And there's that issue of the next day, attention spans being so short with all of us. The next day, it's like, okay, what did we just talk about? We just went over this yesterday. Let's get back on track. And you only got 45 minutes if you're teaching, seventh and up. Or if you're in an English or a double math class, an hour and a half with them, to where you can go ahead and do these things. But really, it's an hour and a half or 45 minutes out of a 24-hour day.
Absolutely.
And each teacher's style is different. So where you may stress one thing, another teacher may stress another. And so there is that whole sensory overload of where the student's like, they want me to do this here, but they want me to do this here. But then when I go home, I don't do any of it. So I agree on that.
We just got to do
Trying
our
to get them to
best,
use
and
it.
someone once told me, "Do your best and hope for the best." So,
Yeah, pretty much.
it is what it is. So let's talk about your portion of the learning map. Tell me, I know you were working on reading comprehension with middle schoolers.
Yeah, so I worked. So this past year, I had the pleasure of being an on-site substitute, and so this was a lesson that I actually did teach during the year, where we were teaching students standard 8.1 for literacy, and basically all that is teaching them how to go ahead and quote, infer, and to cite evidence in their explanation, so this way they could come up with their own arguments along the way. So the way I look at it, there's an importance to teaching this to students, because most students, especially at younger ages, are at those growing stages when they're teenagers and they're starting to come into who they are. Their emotions are all over the place, that even when they present a valid point, sometimes they go about doing it the wrong way.
Yeah,
And sometimes they're a little upset, sometimes they're, they're a little too joyous, or a little too just out there, for lack of a better phrase. And instead of using their skills to go ahead and tell us why this is correct, it pretty much is just because it is. And the reason I find this lesson so important to teach is because when they get out of school and they're in a job and they're using reasoning and they're trying to go ahead and back up their claims, they need to know how to do this, because then they can actually make a credible point instead of just getting angry and saying, well, it is because I said it is. So the way I look about teaching these types of lessons in class, especially with special education groups, is I like to use a lot of repetition when it's appropriate, kind of that rule of three.
yeah,
So in my video, where I didn't really give an explanation as to the fact that I didn't have a classroom, I tried to make it mirror as much of me being in the classroom and in control as possible. So one of the things I do is, when I welcome my class in, I go ahead and let them know, okay, so our agenda's on the board. I'll point right to it, and then I'll have my class go ahead and repeat the agenda back to me.
I like that.
And so as they're doing that, I'll make a little joke or something like that, because I find that laughter kind of helps ease them in, and their guard kind of comes down, and they're a little more receptive to what we're doing. And aside from repetition, I like to mirror a lot of things. So I like to provide an example of how to do something so they can see it being done, and then remind them along the way, like, hey, look, we're doing this together right now, but starting tomorrow, you're going to be doing this by yourself. So if you have a question, please let me know, because if you don't ask me, I won't be able to help you.
Yeah,
So that's one of those things where I love having a projector. I love having a board, because then I can go ahead and do something for them and easily manipulate it, so they can see, this is what he means by doing
yeah,
this. So for this lesson, during the year, I actually had my projector and my board. So I projected up a worksheet on there about the story that we were reading, which was Farewell to Manzanar, which was about Japanese internment camps during World War II here in the U.S.
okay,
And we were going over how to go ahead and cite things, to go ahead and provide a summary, and how do we know that this is all accurate. So my worksheet was pretty much like, here's, you're going to write a little summary for me, about 4 or 5 sentences, and then you're going to give me 3 quotes that back up everything you just said.
yeah,
What are the 3 most important things? So their homework was to go ahead the night before and read that first chapter, and once they read it, kind of start thinking about what would a summary look like. That was all they had to do. So when we went into class, I had them go ahead and write a summary down. And then afterwards we said, well, how do we know this? Can somebody find it in the book for me? And I said, remember, all we're doing here is just trying to find the part in the book that's telling us what we said. So I kept the chapters short, about 7, 8 pages at most. So this way it wasn't too much of a sensory overload for them. And the students were really receptive to it. They were able to find it and they were able to do it. But then it became, okay, so I found it. Now what do I do? And so right underneath that summary, there's these 3 little quote bubbles. And so I said, so here's what you're going to do. You're going to go ahead and write your page number down so I know where you got that quote from. I know where to find it if I need to. And then you're going to go ahead and start writing out your quote and fill in the bubble. So that's pretty much what I had them do. I had somebody point it out to me, and then I said, okay, cool. So then I started writing it, and I said, everybody, you can either, look at my chicken scratch writing up here, or since we know where it's at in the book because we pointed to it, you can go ahead and write it down from there, whichever you want. And then at the end of it, I ended things with a question to help make an inference, which was what was the reason that they that the FBI came and took Gene's dad away. And the students, even though it's explicitly states it in the story and we went over it previously, I'm trying to trick them into thinking it's a new question, but really they already have that knowledge in their head.
Yeah.
At that point, it's like,
and let you know who read it or not.
yeah, exactly. So at that point, it's like, okay. So one person just kind of shyly raises their hand in the class. I'm like, yeah, go ahead. And they said, well, they took him because they thought, you know, he was a part of helping the Japanese. I said, where did you find that? He's like, I don't know. I remember reading it. And I'm like, okay, cool. And so then we went back through the pages and we found it together. And then afterwards I said, that's how you know. And then they said, okay, cool. So now let's go ahead and write that quote down. So this way they can understand what an inference was and how to back it up in a claim. My lesson was obviously a lot longer than yours. And I split mine into 3 sections all at once because I didn't want it to be a sensory overload. Because when you're in a class and you're telling students to write a summary, there's going to be about a 5-10 minute gap.
Yeah.
When you tell the students to go ahead and finish citing stuff, it's going to be about another 5-10 minute gap while they're writing everything down. One of the things I did do was I gave students the option in class to kind of go off of what you were saying about visuals. I let them either have a physical copy of the worksheet or I let them have the digital download for the worksheet so that way they could use it on Google Docs to go ahead and just type it in. So whichever the student felt more comfortable using, they could do. Since all the students in the school have access to a Chromebook in the class and their own Google accounts, I figured it would be a fun way to kind of help them out. And I let them have that freedom to pick, do you want to write or do you want to go ahead and type it out? About 99% wanted to type because nobody wanted to write. So,
of course.
You know, there was that one student that was like trying to excel and was like, I'm going to do both. So they did it writing, and then later on they ended up typing it out later, which I thought was really cool. So that's kind of my way of using visual aids. And then we did do popcorn reading for that assignment as well to kind of go over the quotes that we were doing. And then I also had an audiobook of it as well throughout the course to go ahead and have the students have it read to them. So this way there's kind of a performance aspect to it.
I like that. That's good. And I'm sure you see this. I know I see this. How much in the special ed program that you've worked with, or just any kids, is how mood dependent the students are. Because the students that I work with, it can, you know, one day they can just be great. Everything's fine and dandy. They're doing their work. They're well behaved. Yep. And sometimes it can even be later on the same day. They can flip the 180.
Yes, I was about to say sometimes it's in the same day.
You know, there's just times where they're like, that's their mood and that's that, and you can't tell them anything. And so that's when you have to spend so much time trying to get them to come back from, you know, to get out of their behavior and get out of their funk and to come back to planet Earth. And you can spend so much time doing that before you know it, the bell rings, you know, and so that's where it gets really tricky.
So I've noticed that a lot. Sometimes it's in the same day. And again, we went over how short of an amount of time we spend with these students. You know, 45 minutes to an hour and a half. Although with special education, sometimes we're lucky enough and we have the students for half a day until they're mainstream for the rest of their classes, like PE or maybe a science or a history or something like that. And so you'll have them for English and math. It's extremely dependent on how they are. Sometimes things happen at home before they even get to us at the beginning of the day, and it completely derails their focus, and that's all they're able to focus in on for the rest of the day. So everything is hinged on that one moment before they even got here. And again, it kind of goes back to what you said about we're completely unaware of what's going on outside of the classroom when they leave us until they get to us. And then we spend all that time trying to help unpack what's going on to get to the root of the issue, and then find a way to help them work it out to where they know that, hey, look, you know, if this happened at home, you know, let me know and I can help you out in class. Maybe so one of the things I do is I have area in the back of my classroom where I have like a beanbag chair, and then I have a couple little books and a carpet and like a little lava lamp in the back. And I'll say, hey, do you need to take 5? So yeah, Mr. L, I need to take 5. So hey, go ahead, go for it. Don't worry about it. And I'll leave their paper and I'll turn it upside down. So when I don't see them at their desk in a minute, because as teachers, our minds are going off about 1,000 miles an hour. I'll look at the paper, and when it's upside down, I know, oh, they're in that cooling moment right now. They needed the 5 minutes to go and do something. If that doesn't work, sometimes it's like, hey, tell you what, why don't you go and do me a favor? Why don't you go get a drink of water outside? Why don't you go to the restroom, kind of wash your face, kind of help liven you up a little bit? The walk, the sunlight.
Yeah.
Get you out of your element for a
Absolutely.
minute, let you do something to distract yourself, and then you come back on in, and then we'll go ahead and I'll kind of help get you reintegrated back into what we're doing. But everything is so dependent on their moods, and it's one of those things where as teachers we have to take everything that they're telling us from a visual standpoint, because if you notice, especially with special education, a lot of the students don't tell you what's going on. They'll just act a certain way.
They want to hide it, or they want to be nonverbal, or they're too moody, or they don't want to talk. Absolutely.
And so you're going over their body language, and you're okay, so this isn't right. You start to see that whole thing where they kind of like shrink into their shoulders a little bit, or they're just unresponsive and dazed, and all of a sudden you have to make that call, and it's really difficult, especially when you're lecturing and you have to figure out a way to give everybody like a 5-minute break or something like that, so where they can do something independently, so you can go check in on that student. It's extremely difficult to time out, especially if it's an important lesson, which all lessons are.
It's tough.
Crazy.
It's hard, especially when you can have just one student out of the group who's being so distracting, and it's distracting the other students from the learning that's going on. It's distracting the teacher from teaching the lesson and the students from learning. And that's when it gets hard, because you don't want one student to get in the way of other students learning. So that's where, but that makes it that much more important, to where you got to cut those behaviors off right away, and you got to early intervention. That's the whole key of, that I was taught in my training and the classes that I've done, and is that early intervention is huge. You have to do early intervention.
And kind of on the flip side, as much as you don't want that one student to derail the learning of others, you don't want to leave that one student behind either in whatever it is they're dealing with. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword. If you pull too much, you're going to hurt yourself, but if you don't pull enough, you're hurting the other person involved. And it's a really, I'm going to go ahead and use this is going to sound a little goofy here, but I'm known for using my humor and my own personal likes and stuff, and I'll influence it into my teaching. But I give students the analogy of a wrestling move that I grew up watching. So there was a wrestler by the name of The Undertaker, and he would do this move called Old School. He's about 6'10", and he has to stand up on the top, like he basically has to walk a tightrope, holding onto somebody's arm, and then has to balance himself on there to where he can jump off at full force and come down and slam on them. And the reason I use that analogy is I've told them that everything you do in life is like that tightrope. If you do something too fast or too, aggressive, you're going to hurt yourself. But if you do something too slow, you're going to fall off the rope. It's kind of one of those things where you have to really balance out what you're doing.
Find the right place.
Exactly. So they like that, especially because I showed them like a 5-second clip of the move, and they got all excited about it. So that was like a little moment of joy.
That makes up the pace. I mean, think about it. If you're driving on the freeway going 110 miles an hour, you're going too fast, you're going to get a ticket, you could crash. If you're going 10 miles an hour, you could still get a ticket, and you might get
you can still crash.
So you
Exactly.
You have to find the right speed, not crazy fast, not crazy slow, just the right speed. And that's different for everyone. Every student has their own pace of whatever it is. If it's learning, social, emotional, academic, I mean, there's a million and one things. But I think that's a good kind of gist of what we are both looking for and our philosophies moving forward with the students that we currently work with and will work with.
Yeah, I do. Was there any other questions you had for me on my assignment?
No, I think we went off on a good enough tangent given both our background in special education. So we probably we could keep this going all night, but we don't need I don't think we need our professor watching a video that's longer than the Titanic. So
no,
I think I'm good on my end. Anything from you?
No, I think we covered enough, and I think, like you said, going off on that tangent kind of took care of any questions we would have had off of the assignment, because now we understand the way we think a little bit more. No, it was a wonderful conversation. Oh, I think we're having some issues there. I think your computer froze up.
Yeah, when you stop with the record button. But
oh, there we are. There we are. Okay. No, you froze up for a second, and then all of a sudden it came back through. But there we are. You froze up for a second, and then all of a sudden it came through.
You froze up too for.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's the video's way of telling us. I think we were about ready to end this thing.
I think so too. All right, good work, man.
All right, good work. We'll have this turned in. Gonna go ahead and stop recording as of now.
Okay.